Hyun Park's fingers moved with practiced precision across the microscanner as he cataloged the unusual spore patterns of the Zephyrin midnight fungus. The lab around him hummed with the quiet efficiency of Earth's most advanced xenobiology facility, nestled within the gleaming halls of the Harmony Station, humanity's first true interstellar diplomatic outpost. Fascinating, he murmured to himself, adjusting the scanner to capture the fungus's bioluminescent properties. The cellular structure changes depending on exposure to different wavelengths of light. He was so absorbed in his work that he didn't notice the lab door sliding open with a soft hiss. It wasn't until a shadow fell across his workstation that Hyun looked up, startled to find himself face to face with one of the station's most distinguished visitors. Matriarch Dara stood just 3 feet away, her tall, slender form draped in the shimmering ceremonial robes that marked her status among the Zephyrin delegation. Her skin was the pale blue characteristic of her species, but with the silvery undertones that came with advanced age. 4 elongated fingers adorned each hand, and her large almond-shaped eyes, flecked with silver, studied him with undisguised interest. Hyun jumped to his feet, nearly knocking over his specimen container. "Matriarch Dara, I didn't hear you come in." He bowed slightly, aware of the Zephyrin custom of acknowledging rank. "How may I assist you?" The elderly alien tilted her head, the jeweled ornaments in her head crest tinkling softly. "Please, continue your work. I find it most illuminating to observe humans in their natural environments." Hyun hesitated before slowly sitting back down. Having a high-ranking Zephyrin matriarch, essentially their equivalent of a combined elder stateswoman and spiritual leader, observe him was unprecedented. Most interactions between humans and Zephyrins had been formal, carefully orchestrated diplomatic events since first contact 3 years ago. "You have skillful hands, human," she observed, moving closer to examine the fungus sample. Her voice had the musical quality common to all Zephyrins, but deeper, more resonant with age. "And a patient mind. These are valuable traits among my people." "Thank you, Matriarch," Hyun replied, trying to focus on his work while wondering why one of the highest-ranking Zephyrians had sought him out specifically. The research lab wasn't exactly on the usual tour route for visiting dignitaries. He continued his analysis, explaining his findings as he worked. This fungus species seems to have evolved a symbiotic relationship with the crystal formations on your homeworld's northern continent. The spores respond to mineral content in a way I've never seen before. Dara nodded appreciatively. "Your understanding of our biological systems is impressive for a species so new to interstellar travel." She moved around the lab, examining the various specimens Hyun had collected and cataloged. "Tell me, Hyun Park, do you come from a long line of scientists?" The sudden personal question caught him off guard. "Oh, not exactly. My mother was a marine biologist, but my father was a chef. I'm the first xenobiologist in the family." This seemed to please the matriarch, who nodded thoughtfully. "A diverse genetic background, then. Adaptability is written into your lineage." She tapped one long finger against her chin. "And your health records? All optimal, I presume." Hyun blinked in confusion. "My health records? I'm sorry, matriarch, but those are confidential under station protocols." Of course, Dara said with a dismissive wave. "I merely ask out of concern for all who work on this station. Space travel can be taxing on even the hardiest constitution." The conversation continued to drift in increasingly personal directions. Dara inquired about his education, his achievements, even his personal values and long-term goals. Hyun answered as politely as he could, though he couldn't shake the feeling that this was more than casual curiosity. "Do you hope to form a pair bond eventually, Hyun Park?" Dara asked, examining a sample slide as though she hadn't just asked an intensely personal question. Hyun nearly dropped his scanner. "Oh, what? Oh, you mean get married? I suppose someday, if I meet the right person." "Person," Dara repeated, as if testing the word. "How species-specific of you." Before Hyun could respond to that loaded statement, The lab comm chimed with an incoming message from the chief science officer requesting his presence at the afternoon briefing. "I should get going," Hyun said, grateful for the interruption. "The diplomatic team needs my report on Zelfaran agricultural adaptability before tomorrow's session." Dara nodded, seemingly satisfied with whatever assessment she had been conducting. "You have been most informative, Hyun Park. Your dedication to understanding between our species is commendable." As Hyun gathered his notes and prepared to leave, Dara moved toward the door, then paused. "One moment," she said, turning back to face him. "My family will be hosting a gathering tomorrow evening. A small cultural exchange, nothing formal." Hyun's eyes widened slightly. Private Zelfaran gatherings were rarely open to humans, particularly ones involving family units. "I would be honored," he said carefully, "but I wouldn't want to intrude on a family event." Dara made the soft trilling sound that Hyun had learned was the Zelfaran equivalent of light laughter. "Nonsense. It would be my pleasure to introduce you to my family. In fact, my granddaughter Sue will be most interested to meet you." She stepped closer and, in a gesture that shocked Hyun with its familiarity, placed her four-fingered hand briefly on his shoulder. The touch was light but deliberate. "Join us at the 7th hour in the Zelfaran residential quarter, Section 4. Wear something comfortable." With that cryptic instruction, Matriarch Dara glided from the lab, leaving Hyun staring after her in confusion. As the door hissed shut behind her, Hyun couldn't help but feel that something significant had just happened, something beyond simple diplomatic outreach. Little did he know that the matriarch's invitation would be the first step on a path that would change his life, the future of human-Zelfaran relations, and the course of two civilizations. Hyun adjusted his formal uniform for the 10th time as he approached Section 4 of the Zelfaran residential quarter. Despite Matriarch Dara's suggestion to wear something comfortable, he'd opted for his official diplomatic attire, a decision he now questioned as sweat gathered at his collar. The station's environmental controls always kept Zelfaran areas slightly warmer and more humid than human comfort levels. "This is just a cultural exchange," he reminded himself, "a chance to build better relations with our newest allies." Yet something about the matriarch's intense interest in him had set off warning bells in his mind. The entrance to the gathering opened before him, and Hyun froze mid-step. This was no casual get-together. The expansive chamber glittered with ceremonial decorations, crystal formations arranged in precise patterns, bioluminescent flowers imported from the Zelfaran homeworld hanging in delicate cascades from the ceiling. At least 30 Zelfarans milled about in what were clearly their finest garments, jeweled head crests catching the light as they turned to stare at him. "Oh no," Hyun whispered. "What have I walked into?" A server approached with a tray of drinks, the liquid inside shifting colors in a mesmerizing pattern. Hyun took one gratefully, hoping the beverage might help calm his nerves. "Human Hyun Park," announced a melodious voice from his right. Matriarch Dara approached, her formal robes even more elaborate than the day before. "You honor us with your presence. Come, there are many eager to meet you." Before he could form a response, Hyun found himself being led through the crowd. Each introduction followed a similar pattern. The Zelfarans would eye him with undisguised curiosity, ask pointed questions about his accomplishments, then nod approvingly at Dara. It felt less like a social gathering and more like an inspection. "Your presentation records indicate high fertility potential," one elderly Zelfaran commented after Dara introduced him as her cousin. "Most promising." Hyun nearly spat out his drink. "I'm sorry, what?" The Zelfaran merely nodded sagely and moved on, leaving Hyun bewildered and increasingly uncomfortable. Then the crowd seemed to part, and Hyun's discomfort momentarily gave way to genuine awe. A young Zelfaran woman entered the chamber, and even to his human eyes, he could tell she was striking. She stood taller than most females of her species, her movements fluid and graceful as she navigated the gathering. Like all Zelfarans, her skin was blue, but hers held a warmer undertone that complemented her eyes, large, expressive, and a stunning violet shade rarely seen among her kind. "Ah, there she is," Dara said with evident pride. "My granddaughter, Sue." As Sue approached, Hyun noticed she wore less elaborate attire than the others, with a simple headband rather than a full ceremonial crest. Her expression was guarded but curious. "So you are the human scientist my grandmother has chosen," she said by way of greeting. "Chosen?" Hyun repeated, the warning bells in his mind now clanging at full volume. Sue's eyes widened slightly, then darted to her grandmother. "For the cultural exchange program. Of course," she added quickly. "Grandmother has spoken of little else but you since yesterday. I apologize for her enthusiasm." "No need for apologies," Hyun said, relieved to find someone who seemed as uncomfortable with the situation as he felt. "I'm honored to participate in any program that improves understanding between our species." An awkward silence followed, finally broken when Sue asked, "What is your area of study, human Hyun?" "Just Hyun is fine. I'm a xenobiologist, focusing on interspecies biochemical compatibility." Sue's posture changed instantly, her professional interest clearly piqued. "Truly? My own research centers on cross-species genetic adaptation. I've been studying how certain traits might be selectively integrated across different genetic foundations." For the first time since arriving, Hyun felt himself relax. "That's fascinating. I've been working on similar concepts with the fungal samples from your world's northern continent. The way they adapt to different mineral compositions might have applications for crop development in varying soil types." "You've isolated the adaptation mechanisms?" Sue asked, leaning forward eagerly. "I've been attempting similar work with zephyrin protein structures." What followed was 20 minutes of animated scientific discussion that drew curious glances from other guests. Hyun found himself genuinely enjoying Sue's company. Her brilliance was evident, and she possessed a wry sense of humor that occasionally surfaced between technical observations. "Your approach to cellular membrane permeability is quite unorthodox," she noted with what Hyun now recognized as the subtle zephyrin equivalent of a smile. "Humans are known for thinking outside established parameters," he replied. "Sometimes it leads to breakthroughs, sometimes to spectacular failures. A quality my grandmother apparently finds appealing," Sue said with a meaningful glance toward Dara, who had been watching them intently from across the room. Before Hyun could inquire about that comment, a clear, ringing sound cut through the chamber. Matriarch Dara stood at the center of the gathering, tapping a ceremonial crystal with a small silver rod. The resonant tone silenced all conversation immediately. "Honored family members and distinguished guests," Dara began, her voice carrying effortlessly through the room. "Today marks a significant moment in our line's history. As your matriarch, it is my privilege to identify potential additions to our genetic heritage." Hyun took another sip of his drink, curious about this apparent zephyrin tradition. "For the first time, I present a human candidate," Dara continued, her gaze finding Hyun in the crowd. "Human Hyun Park possesses all qualities a proper mate should have. His genetic contribution would strengthen our line considerably." The drink caught in Hyun's throat. He coughed violently, eyes watering as the implications of Dara's words sank in. This wasn't a cultural exchange. It was some kind of matchmaking event. Beside him, Sue's face had darkened to a deep indigo color that Hyun recognized as the zephyrin equivalent of a blush. Several guests were murmuring to each other, some nodding approvingly, others looking shocked. Furthermore, Dara continued, seemingly oblivious to Hyun's distress, "His compatibility with my granddaughter, Sue, shows tremendous promise. Their intellectual harmony suggests optimal offspring potential." "Grandmother," Sue exclaimed, her voice strained with embarrassment. "This is highly inappropriate by both human and zephyrin standards." Hyun finally managed to clear his throat. "There seems to be a misunderstanding," he croaked, looking desperately at Sue. "I had no idea this was a mate selection gathering." Sue finished for him, her violet eyes now fixed firmly on the floor. "I should have realized when she insisted I wear the traditional receptivity colors." Dara's silver-flecked eyes twinkled with what Hyun now recognized as mischief. Misunderstanding. Nonsense. I've researched human courtship rituals extensively. This merely expedites the process. Around them, the gathering had dissolved into fascinated observation of this unexpected diplomatic incident. Hyun felt as though he had suddenly become an exhibit in his own xenobiology lab, a specimen being studied from all angles. Perhaps, he said carefully, setting down his drink with a slightly trembling hand, we should continue this discussion somewhere less public. Sue nodded gratefully. An excellent suggestion. Grandmother, we must speak privately. As they moved toward a side chamber, Hyun caught fragments of conversation from the Zeltharan guests. Unusual specimen, but the matriarch's instincts are rarely wrong. The height difference might be problematic for offspring. His cranial structure suggests high intelligence, at least for a human. Hyun felt his face burning. Somehow, in the space of 24 hours, he'd gone from being a respected xenobiologist to being evaluated as breeding stock for one of the most prominent Zeltharan families in the diplomatic corps. And the worst part was, despite the mortifying circumstances, he couldn't help feeling intrigued by the brilliant scientist walking beside him. The news of Matriarch Dara's public endorsement of Hyun as a potential mate for her granddaughter spread through Harmony Station faster than a hull breach. By morning, both human and Zeltharan diplomatic corps were buzzing with rumors and speculation. Hyun kept his head down as he entered the main laboratory, hoping to avoid the stares and whispers that had followed him since the gathering 2 nights ago. He had barely slept, alternating between embarrassment over the public spectacle and surprising warmth when thinking about his conversations with Sue. There he is, the man who's going to have blue babies, whispered a technician to her colleague, not quite quietly enough. Hyun pretended not to hear as he activated his workstation. He had just begun reviewing his research notes when his comm unit pinged with an incoming message. It was from Sue. Meet me in Hydroponics Lab 3 at midday. Need to discuss project parameters. Come along. The message was formal, but Hyun couldn't help smiling. Since the disastrous gathering, they had established the pretense of a joint research project to explain their meetings. It wasn't entirely a fiction. They had indeed begun collaborating on a study of cross-species biochemical responses, but it also provided cover for what had become increasingly personal conversations. Midday couldn't come fast enough. When Hyun finally made his way to the hydroponics lab, his heart beat a little faster as the door slid open to reveal Sue adjusting the nutrient flow to a series of experimental plant beds. "You're 2 minutes late," she said without looking up, but Hyun could hear the smile in her voice. "I had to take an alternate route. Your father's aides seem to be everywhere today." Sue's expression darkened at the mention of her father. "He's been insufferable since grandmother's announcement. You'd think I was 16 instead of 63. Hyun still struggled with Zeltharan age conversion. Despite appearing roughly his age by human standards, Sue was technically old enough to be his grandmother. The thought made him chuckle. "What's funny?" she asked, raising one elegant eyebrow. "Just thinking about how your grandmother would point out that I'm practically an infant by your standards. I'm only 35. Sue moved closer, examining a soil sample that's standing near enough that their arms almost touched. Age is measured differently across species. Maturity is what matters, and in that, we are well matched. The warmth in her violet eyes made Hyun's breath catch. Over the past 3 weeks, their research project had given them plenty of reasons to spend time together. What had begun as a mutual scientific interest had evolved into something neither of them had anticipated. "I've been thinking about your theory on protein adaptation," Hyun said, forcing himself to focus on work. "If we combine it with my fungal integration model, we might have a breakthrough in cross-species medical applications." Their discussion flowed easily between scientific collaboration and personal connection. Sue shared stories of growing up under the weight of her family's diplomatic legacy, while Hyun described his childhood in the coastal research stations of Earth. As Hyun demonstrated a new scanning technique he developed, The lab door suddenly hissed open without the customary entry request. Senior Minister Ta strode in, flanked by two aides. His tall, imposing figure seemed to fill the lab, his elaborate ceremonial crest marking him as one of the highest-ranking Zul'Thurans on the station. Father. Sue straightened, instinctively putting distance between herself and Hyun. This is an unauthorized entry into a secure research area. Tae's silver-flecked eyes narrowed as they took in the scene. Unlike his mother Dara, who carried her age with a mischievous grace, Ta wore his years with stern authority. I am still Chief Administrator of Scientific Resources, he said coldly. No area is unauthorized to me. His gaze shifted to Hyun. Especially when it appears my daughter is continuing this inappropriate association. Hyun stepped forward, determined to be respectful but firm. Minister Tae, Researcher Sue, and I are conducting valuable scientific work that could benefit both our species. Save your explanations, human, Tai interrupted. This meeting is concluded. Sue, you will return to our family quarters immediately. Sue's skin darkened with anger. Father, I am a senior xenobiologist with 3 doctorates. I will choose my own research partners. Absolutely not, Ta thundered, slamming his 4-fingered hand on the conference table that separated them. This human association compromises your position and our family standing. Have you forgotten the negotiations underway for the Cirrus Belt mining rights? How do you think it looks when the daughter of the senior minister is consorting with a human scientist, while our peoples argue over resource allocation? Hyun flinched at the word consorting, but kept his expression neutral. The dispute over mining rights in the resource-rich asteroid belt had been escalating for months. Both species needed the rare minerals found there, and neither side was willing to compromise. Our research could help resolve those tensions, Sue argued, if we could demonstrate mutual benefits from biological collaboration. Enough. Todd cut her off. You will focus on projects that directly benefit Zul'Thuran interests. I've arranged for you to join the developmental team on our homeworld next month. With that, he turned and swept from the room, clearly expecting Sue to follow. She stood her ground until the door closed behind him. I'm sorry, she said quietly. He's always been traditional, but since my mother's passing, he's become even more rigid. Despite Minister Tae's edict, Sue continued meeting with Hyun over the following weeks. Their professional collaboration deepened, as did their personal connection. They became experts at finding moments together between diplomatic functions and official duties, a shared meal in an out-of-the-way station cafeteria, joint inspection of environmental systems, even accidentally ending up in the same transport pod. But as their relationship grew stronger, so did the tensions between their peoples. The mining rights negotiations had reached a critical point, with both sides making increasingly unreasonable demands. Then came the incident at the cultural exhibition. Hyun had been invited to view artifacts from the Zul'Thuran homeworld, a rare privilege for a human. As he admired a crystalline structure that reminded him of earth coral, he commented to his guide, "The decorative artistry is remarkable." The room fell silent. Too late, Hyun realized his terrible mistake. The decorative object was in fact the sacred resonator of the first matriarchs, one of the most revered religious artifacts in Zul'Thuran culture. Within hours, diplomatic channels were ablaze with accusations of human disrespect. Minister Ta cited the incident as evidence of humanity's fundamental incompatibility with Zul'Thuran civilization. And despite Hyun's profuse apologies, the damage was done. 3 days later, Hyun's station commander called him into her office. Commander Jong looked uncomfortable as she activated the privacy field around her desk. "I'm sorry, Park, but this comes from the highest levels. You must return to Earth immediately. Your security clearance has been revoked, and you're being reassigned to the Lunar Research Facility." Hyun felt as though the artificial gravity had suddenly failed. "Commander, the incident was a cultural misunderstanding. I've submitted formal apologies." "This isn't just about the artifact," Jung interrupted. "Minister Ta has filed a formal complaint about your relationship with his daughter." He claims you've been attempting to extract classified Zelthuran biological information through her, and he's forbidden her from any further contact with human delegates, especially you. That's ridiculous. Our research is collaborative. Not. I know, the commander said more gently. But with the mining negotiations so delicate, Earth Central won't risk further provocation. Your transport leaves in 3 hours. I suggest you pack quickly. Numb with shock, Hyun returned to his quarters. In just 3 hours, he would leave not just the station, but any chance of seeing Sue again. He tried sending her a message, but it bounced back. Communications to her were already blocked. As he stood at the boarding gate with his single bag of possessions, Hyun felt someone watching him. He turned to find Matriarch Dara standing silently nearby, her ancient eyes observing him thoughtfully. Matriarch, he acknowledged, bowing slightly. I apologize for any disruption I've caused your family. The disruption was long overdue, she replied cryptically. My son has forgotten that stagnation leads to extinction. Our peoples need each other, whether he acknowledges it or not. She glided closer, her voice dropping so only he could hear. This separation serves no one, she said softly. Remember, human, sometimes the oldest traditions provide new paths forward. Before Hyun could ask what she meant, Dara pressed a small crystal into his palm. When you are ready, seek the Krell. It has not been invoked in 7 generations, but the right remains. The final boarding call sounded. With a last look at the station that had briefly felt like home, Hyun stepped through the gate, clutching the mysterious crystal and wondering if he would ever see Sue's violet eyes again. The cold light of an alien sun filtered through the viewport as Hyun's shuttle descended toward the Zelthuran homeworld. His stomach knotted with a mixture of determination and fear. No human had ever set foot on this planet without an official invitation. What he was about to do could either bridge 2 worlds or destroy his career entirely. Final approach to Zelthuran Capital Landing Zone, announced the automated pilot. Please secure all items. Hyun checked his small bag one last time. Inside was everything he had learned during 3 exhausting months of research on Earth. Ancient Zelthuran texts, cultural analyses, historical precedents, all studied with obsessive focus during his forced exile at the Lunar Research Facility. And nestled at the bottom, wrapped in protective cloth, lay Matriarch Dara's crystal, the key to his desperate plan. Unidentified shuttle, crackled the communication system. You are not on our arrival schedule. State your purpose. Hyun took a deep breath. Research Specialist Hyun Park, formerly of Harmony Station, requesting permission to land under Protocol 6 of the Interspecies Cultural Exchange Agreement. A long silence followed. Protocol 6 was rarely invoked. It allowed for personal scholarly visits in the pursuit of cultural understanding. It was flimsy justification, but technically valid. Permission granted under provisional status, came the reluctant reply. Security will meet you upon landing. The shuttle touched down with a gentle thud. When the hatch opened, Hyun found himself facing 6 tall Zelthuran security officers, their ceremonial armor indicating their elite status. Human Hyun Park, stated the lead officer, you will be escorted to the Diplomatic Reception Center for processing. Hyun nodded respectfully, following the officers through the spaceport. The Zelthuran capital sprawled around him, a breathtaking array of crystalline structures that seemed to grow organically from the rocky terrain. Under different circumstances, he would have been awestruck by the beauty. At the reception center, a stern-faced administrator met him. Your visit is highly irregular. Human Park, what is your true purpose here? I seek an audience with the High Council, Hyun stated, keeping his voice steady despite his racing heart. The administrator's silver-flecked eyes widened. Impossible. The council meets only with official representatives. Hyun carefully removed Dara's crystal from his bag and held it up. The strange, multifaceted gem caught the light, sending prismatic patterns dancing across the walls. I carry the token of Matriarch Dara of the 3rd lineage. By ancient custom, this grants me the right to petition. The room fell silent. The administrator stared at the crystal, then at Hyun, clearly struggling with the unprecedented situation. "Wait here," he finally said before hurrying away. Hyun stood alone in the reception area for nearly an hour. His legs ached from standing, but he refused to sit. Every Zelfiran text stressed the importance of proper posture when requesting a formal audience. Finally, the doors slid open to reveal Matriarch Dara herself, her ancient eyes twinkling with poorly concealed amusement. "Human Hyun Park," she said formally, though Hyun could hear the warmth beneath her official tone. "Your petition has been granted. The council will see you immediately." As they walked together down a long crystalline corridor, Dara spoke quietly. "You have studied our ways well. I did not expect you to arrive so quickly." "I had strong motivation," Hyun replied. "Is Sue. She has been assigned to the Homeworld Research Center, as her father wished. She does not know you are here." Before Hyun could ask more, they arrived at massive doors inscribed with ancient Zelfiran symbols. 2 guards swung them open to reveal the High Council chamber, a vast, domed room where 7 senior Zelfirans sat in a semicircle on elevated platforms. In the center position, looking thoroughly displeased, sat Minister Ta. "What is the meaning of this interruption, Mother?" he demanded as Dara led Hyun into the chamber. "And why have you brought this human before the council?" Dara stepped forward. "Honored counselors, I present human Hyun Park, who comes bearing my lineage crystal and seeking rightful audience." Tae's face darkened to a stormy blue. "This is highly irregular. Whatever diplomatic matter he wishes to discuss should go through proper channels." "I am not here on diplomatic business," Hyun said, stepping forward and bowing deeply to the council. "I come to invoke an ancient right." The chamber erupted in murmurs. Ta leaned forward, his expression suspicious. What right could a human possibly invoke under Zelfiran law? Hyun straightened his back and spoke the words he had practiced 1,000 times. "I, Hyun Park of Earth, invoke the right of Krell, the 3 tridals of worth, as established in the First Age by Matriarch Zella." Complete silence fell over the chamber. The council members looked at each other in shock, while Tae's face shifted through several shades of blue before settling on a dangerous indigo. "Impossible," he finally said. "The Krell is for Zelfirans seeking to prove their worth to join a higher lineage. No outsider has ever invoked it. Yet nothing in the ancient texts forbids it," countered Dara, stepping forward. "The human invokes the right of Krell," she announced to the stunned Zelfiran council, "as is his right under the ancient law." One elderly counselor leaned forward. "The law may not forbid it, but it is clearly not intended for other species. No outsider could possibly complete the 3 trials." "Then we have nothing to fear," Dara replied with the hint of a smile. "If he fails, the matter is settled. If he succeeds," she left the sentence unfinished, but her meaning was clear. The council conferred in hushed tones while Hyun stood still, his heart pounding. Everything depended on this moment: his future, his relationship with Sue, perhaps even the future of human-Zelfiran relations. Finally, the eldest counselor spoke. "The council acknowledges the right of Krell. The trials will begin at dawn tomorrow." He fixed Hyun with a stern gaze. "Be warned, human. These trials were designed to test Zelfiran capabilities. They may prove lethal to your kind." "I understand and accept the risks," Hyun replied formally. "So be it," Ta said coldly. "Prepare yourself, human. Tomorrow you will face the Highland trial in the toxic regions of our world. Few of our own people have survived it." As the council adjourned, Hyun was escorted to sparse guest quarters to prepare. He spent the evening reviewing his notes on Zelfiran physiology and the limited information available about the 3 trials. The Highland trial would test endurance in the Zelfiran Highlands, where the atmosphere contained compounds toxic to both species. Dawn came too quickly. Hyun was led to a preparation chamber where technicians helped him don a sealed environmental suit, standard issue for the trial, but designed for Zelfiran anatomy. making it awkward and uncomfortable for his human form. "The seals will hold for 6 hours," explained the technician, adjusting his helmet. "The trial requires you to reach the crystal shrine and return before your air supply fails." He looked at Hyun with what might have been pity. The fastest completion by a Zelfaran was 5 hours and 12 minutes. Hyun nodded grimly. The suit was already restricting his movement, and he'd have to navigate unfamiliar terrain faster than any Zelfaran had managed. As he was led to the transport that would take him to the trial starting point, Hyun caught a glimpse of movement in a side corridor. Standing half hidden behind a column was Sue, her violet eyes wide with shock and concern. She hadn't known he was coming, hadn't been part of his plan, but somehow she had found out. Their eyes met across the distance. Hyun couldn't speak through his sealed helmet, and there were too many witnesses for her to approach. But in that brief moment of connection, he saw something that gave him strength. Hope and fear mingled in her violet eyes. Yes, but also pride. And something more, something that made the dangerous journey ahead seem worth every risk. As the transport doors closed between them, Hyun made a silent promise. He would survive this trial and the ones to follow. He would earn his place in this world, not just for Sue, but for all humans and Zelfarans who might follow the path they were creating. The transport rose into the air, carrying him toward the toxic highlands and the first of 3 impossible challenges. The great hall of accomplishment fell silent as Hyun stood before the final trial. His body still ached from the Highland trial, where he had surprised everyone by completing the toxic mountain journey in just 4 hours and 46 minutes. The human had mapped the most efficient route through the treacherous landscape rather than following the traditional path, cutting nearly half an hour off the previous record. The second trial, the Depths Challenge, had tested his courage and adaptability as he navigated the underwater caverns of the Southern Sea. While Zelfarans had natural advantages in aquatic environments, Hyun had compensated with remarkable problem-solving skills, using sound vibrations to map passages where visibility failed. Now, exhausted but determined, he faced the third and most difficult challenge, the puzzle of 9 dimensions. This final trial tests not just intelligence, but the very way your mind perceives reality, explained Elder Jun, the trial overseer. Zelfaran brains naturally process multiple dimensional planes simultaneously. The puzzle must be solved within 1 hour. Before Hyun stood what appeared to be a crystalline cube, but as he moved around it, impossible geometries revealed themselves. Angles that shouldn't exist, surfaces that seemed to fold into themselves. Minister Ta watched from the observation platform, his expression smug. The human mind simply cannot conceive of the solution. He whispered to his fellow council members, "This will end his foolish quest." Matriarch Dara said nothing, but her ancient eyes never left Hyun as he studied the puzzle. The gathered Zelfarans murmured among themselves as Hyun circled the strange object. Many had come to watch the human who had somehow survived the first 2 trials. Some were curious, others dismissive, but all were fascinated by this unprecedented event. Hyun touched the surface of the puzzle gently. Unlike the physical challenges, this one would test the fundamental differences between human and Zelfaran cognition. Their brains had evolved differently. Zelfarans could naturally perceive dimensional relationships that humans struggle to conceptualize. But Hyun had prepared for this. During his 3 months of research, he had studied not just Zelfaran culture but their mathematics and perception. And during those long nights alone in his lunar quarters, he had developed a theory. He took a deep breath and began. Instead of trying to visualize all 9 dimensions simultaneously, as a Zelfaran would, Hyun approached the puzzle sequentially. His fingers moved across the crystalline surfaces, making adjustments in careful patterns. In the observation area, Minister Tai leaned forward. "What is he doing?" "That's not the correct approach." Sue, who had been permitted to observe the final trial, spoke quietly. "He's breaking down the problem. Where we see all dimensions at once, he's addressing them in sequence." Minutes ticked by. Hyun's hands moved faster, more confidently. The puzzle began to shift, its surfaces realigning in ways that made several Zephyrin observers gasp. "That shouldn't be possible," whispered Elder June. "He's solving it, but through a completely different method." At precisely 53 minutes into the challenge, the crystalline puzzle emitted a harmonious tone and resolved itself into perfect symmetry. Hyun stepped back, his face shining with sweat, but his eyes bright with triumph. "Impossible," whispered Tai as Hyun completed the final trial. The minister's face had turned a pale shade of blue that indicated deep shock. "Not impossible," Matriarch Dara corrected, her ancient eyes gleaming with satisfaction. "Simply different." His human mind found another way. She turned to address the stunned council members. "Where we perceive unity, he perceives sequence. Where we see pattern, he sees process. These are not lesser qualities. They are complementary." The Great Hall erupted in conversation. Never in recorded history had an outsider completed the Krell, let alone all 3 trials with such unexpected approaches. Elder Jun stepped forward, raising her hands for silence. The council must deliberate on this unprecedented outcome. The deliberation lasted 3 hours. Hyun waited patiently in a small antechamber, too exhausted to pace, but too anxious to rest. When he was finally called back into the Great Hall, the entire council stood to receive him, a mark of respect he had not anticipated. "Human Hyun Park," announced Elder Jun, "the council has reached its decision. You have completed the 3 trials of worth in a manner that satisfies the ancient law, if not its traditional methods. The right of Krell has been honored." A murmur ran through the assembled Zephyrians as Jun continued. "In accordance with our oldest traditions, you are granted the status of Worthy One. You may claim the privilege you sought when invoking the Krell." Hyun stepped forward. This was the moment he had worked toward for months. "I claim the right of association with the 3rd lineage, specifically with researcher Su, without interference or prohibition." All eyes turned to Minister Tai, whose opposition to the human-Zephyrin relationship had begun this entire journey. For a long moment, the minister stared at Hyun, his expression unreadable. Then, with formal dignity, he inclined his head. "The claim is valid," he acknowledged. "The council recognizes your right of association with my daughter, researcher Su of the 3rd lineage." 7 days later, a ceremony was held to mark Hyun's successful completion of the Krell. The human stood proud in traditional Zephyrin robes that had been carefully modified to accommodate his different physiology. The Great Hall was filled with both Zephyrins and, surprisingly, a delegation of humans who had been hastily dispatched from Earth when news of the unprecedented events reached them. As the formal proceedings concluded, Su approached through the crowd. She wore the ceremonial colors of her lineage, but with subtle elements that matched Hyun's robes. Without hesitation, she extended her hand in the formal manner permitted between acknowledged potential mates. Hyun took her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers in the gesture that symbolized mutual respect and intention. A collective sigh went through the Zephyrin audience. Many had never witnessed such a cross-species pairing. "You risked everything," Su said softly, her violet eyes searching his. "Some things are worth the risk," he replied, squeezing her hand gently. In the weeks that followed, the impact of Hyun's achievement rippled through both human and Zephyrin societies. The story of the human who completed the Krell captivated public imagination. More importantly, it opened new avenues for cooperation between the species. Minister Tai, having accepted the outcome with formal grace, approached Hyun after a council session. "Your methods were unexpected," he acknowledged stiffly. "Perhaps there is merit in examining problems from different perspectives." This reluctant recognition led to a breakthrough in the resource dispute that had been threatening relations between the species. Hyun suggested applying the same principles he had used in the Krell, looking at the problem sequentially rather than simultaneously. Working together, human and Zephyrin scientists developed a mining technique that could extract different resources from the asteroid belt at different orbital phases, allowing both species to meet their needs without conflict. 6 months after the Krell, The formal bonding ceremony between Hyun and Sue became the first officially recognized union between their species. Representatives from both worlds gathered in the Crystal Garden of the Zelfarin capital. The ceremony combined elements from both cultures, symbolizing the new path they were creating together. Matriarch Gera, resplendent in her most elaborate ceremonial robes, addressed the gathered dignitaries from both worlds. When I first saw this human in his laboratory on Harmony Station, I recognized qualities our people needed. His hands worked differently from ours. His mind approached problems along paths we would never consider, but these differences revealed new possibilities. She looked at Hyun and Sue standing together, their hands joined in the formal bonding position. Sometimes it takes an alien grandmother to see what others cannot, that our differences are precisely what make us perfect for each other. As the traditional crystals were exchanged between the bonded pair, human and Zelfarin attendees alike found themselves moved by the sight. Here, in this unlikely union, they saw not just two individuals, but the potential for their species to grow together rather than apart. That evening, as celebration lights glimmered across the Crystal City, Hyun and Sue stood on a balcony overlooking the capital. In the sky above, the first joint human-Zelfaran research vessel prepared to depart for the asteroid belt, its mission to implement their collaborative mining solution. Your grandmother always knew this would happen, Hyun said, shaking his head in wonder. From that very first day in my lab, she was planning all of this. Sue's lips curved in the subtle Zelfarin smile that Hyun had come to love. Matriarchs are known for their foresight, but even grandmother couldn't have predicted exactly how it would unfold. I still can't believe I completed the Krell. The puzzle alone should have been impossible for a human mind. Not impossible, Sue corrected, echoing her grandmother's words. Just different. That's what makes it work between us, between our peoples. We see the universe through different eyes. As they watched their two worlds beginning to truly work together for the first time, Hyun couldn't help but marvel at how far they had come. From an awkward cultural misunderstanding at a family gathering to a union that was helping reshape interstellar relations, all because an alien grandmother had decided he was perfect for her granddaughter.